I'm here with Doug Kirkpatrick, and Doug was with Morningstar Farms and now is doing some consulting, and I'm really excited. Our audience, this is totally new stuff to you. This is totally new approach to leadership. Doug, do you even call it leadership? It's like leadership without leaders, isn't it? But you can start wherever you want. But I'm really looking forward to this podcast. This is great to have you here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, David. I appreciate that very much. Good to be here. I call it natural leadership. So there's positional leadership and power leadership and structural leadership and all kinds of leadership. But what we practice, what I've been talking about for years, is what I call natural leadership. And that's leadership that is earned through trust, respect, and communication. It's not given by position or rank or degree of authority. And that creates a very different dynamic in organizations whereby people are working together more collaboratively, more productively, hopefully with higher performance, and certainly, in my experience, greater happiness.
You know, it's kind of funny you call it natural leadership. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't say this, but coming from the food industry, I almost expected like you'd call it organic leadership or paleo leadership or keto leader, be something related to food. But natural is good enough. But how did this all come about?
Yeah, well, it really came about through a very visionary entrepreneur named Chris Ruffer. And I worked with Chris at another food processing company in the 1980s. And it was a very high-tech, very successful company. And we grew it to probably $100 million or so. And then Chris moved on to start a new company in the tomato processing industry called Morningstar. And I left to join him in his core team in the spring of 1990. And we had a small team, about 24 people. I was the financial controller. We were working out of a tiny little farmhouse on a canal bank in north central California. And there were about 24 of us. And one day, Chris came into the farmhouse and said, I'd like to have a meeting of colleagues and discuss governance and how to organize this company. And we said, sure, that sounds great. So we all met with him in a dusty construction trailer out on the job site. This was March of 1990. And we sat around in a circle in a double-wide trailer on steel folding chairs. And he passed out a document, which I still have, titled The Morningstar Team Principles. And in that document, he proposed that we organize around two very simple key principles. The first being that people shouldn't use force against other people, which is the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. And the second, that people should keep the commitments they make to each other, which is also foundational to law, especially civil and contract law. And so we said, okay, well, let's discuss and debate for a couple hours, which we did. And at the end of the evening, we had really no objections. These principles made perfect sense. They were logical, they were historical and foundational. And so we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And we walked out of the trailer as what we called a self-managed enterprise. So we had a lot of work to do. This was March of 1990. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory and drive the trucks. We had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean from Italy. We had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constructing, fabricating, welding, pulling wire. Finally, July 16th of 1990, we threw the switch. We produced 90 million pounds of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market, essentially changed the cost structure of the entire industry overnight. And we did it all without a single human boss, manager, supervisor, foreman, vice president, nor any titles of any kind. In fact, zero command authority. We worked as a team, collaborative network of self-managed, focused individuals, and we built the company.
So did I hear you correctly? Did you say 90 million pounds of tomato paste?
Correct. Yep.
Man, I can't even fathom what that is. But so how many people were in the organization at that time versus, maybe today or recently?
Well, we had to hire a few more people on a year-round basis, but not that many. We probably drifted up to 35 or 40 year-round people from our original 24 at the time of the meeting. Then we're a seasonal operation, so we had to hire hundreds of people to drive the trucks and operate the factory during the 3.5 months of intensive 24/7 industrial processing. So we had that kind of surge of employment in the summer and early fall, but the core team, the year-round team, probably drifted up another 10 or 15 people at the time.
Wow. And so did this approach basically extend through all the hundreds of seasonal workers?
Yes, it did, and that's why it works. So even the founder subjected himself to the same principles that applied to everyone else, and they extended throughout the entire workforce, whether people were year-round or seasonal or salaried or hourly. It really didn't matter. These principles are universal, and they really only work if you recognize the universality of them.
So how do you structure the different roles so people can interact productively?
Right. So it's a process of negotiation. So when we detect a need for a particular role, for example, if we added more motor control centers or more horsepower, and we recognize that we need another industrial electrician, so we would go out and source candidates. But the people who would interview and make the decision on who to hire were the electricians themselves, the existing electricians, because no one's more invested in finding the right people to get on the bus than the people who will be working side by side with those people prospectively for perhaps years to come. So everyone's a manager, everyone's involved in major decisions. But then in terms of specifics, we get down to negotiation. And we negotiate the precise processes for which each individual agrees to be fully accountable. We negotiate the scope and quantum of decision-making authority with respect to each process. So is a person going to be the decision maker regarding a process, or merely making recommendations to another decision maker, or making a decision after receiving input from others, or making the decision when the regular decision maker is on vacation? We want to be very, very explicit, very clear about process ownership, process stewardship, and what we call decision rights, which is one's decision-making authority. And that's really negotiated by and between colleagues. Now, we're a network. We're not a hierarchical, vertical org structure. So these agreements are made between each person and the individuals with whom that person works most closely. And that could be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe up to 15 people. We can't get much more than that. Certainly can't get more than 25 because then we just break down. It's impossible to maintain more than 25 or so complex work relationships in a cognitive sense and manage them effectively. So somewhere between 7 and 15 relationships are identified, and then people actually develop agreements between each other. call them peer agreements or colleague letters of understanding. And people negotiate the scope, the contours of their work relationships with each other, freely negotiated.
So how do you want to ask something, Jeff?
Yeah, I want to jump in. Doug, real quick, just there's a little bit of feedback on the mic. It's pretty, you have that Yeti mic like we do. It's a little sensitive and it's awesome for the audio quality. I just want to let you know there's a little clicking here and there. So, and then I also wanted to ask a question. Just real quick, does this structure at Morningstar continue today?
Yes, it continues precisely the way we started it in 1990. It's really two core principles around which we're free to wrap any system, tool, app, game, methodology, approach, anything. We can use any tool in the toolbox as long as we respect the original two core principles. So if we want to use 5S or Six Sigma or statistical process control or Kanban or Lean or whatever kind of tool we want to use is completely available to us at any time.
Gotcha. Back to you, Dad.
Yeah, and did I notice, Doug, that Morningstar is also doing a pretty highly specialized organic line or something along those lines?
Yeah.
It wasn't just tomatoes anymore. The company's actually has branched out and doing more of a variety of things, but it was a very heavy specialized organic, natural, all yada yada type of stuff. Us people on the left coast, the wild, wacky left coast that you're part of.
Of course.
We look for
absolutely.
that stuff, right?
Absolutely. No question about it.
So how big is Morningstar today?
It's close to $1 billion company today.
Okay.
Thousands of employees. We actually don't call them employees. We consider each person, whether they're seasonal or year-round, to be a professional colleague in every sense of the word. And so there are thousands of seasonal employees and hundreds of year-round colleagues.
Okay, and let me get back to a point you were talking about where you were mentioning how people interact and they're on these teams of 7 to 15. How is accountability handled?
Well, accountability is a fascinating topic, as I'm sure you know. And really, we consider these colleague letters of understanding to be enforceable contracts between peers. I mean, they're quite serious. So people identify what we call a personal commercial mission, which is your why. So why do you come to work here every day? What does excellence look like in your role? How does what you do support the overall mission, vision, values, and principles of the enterprise? We ask every single person to identify their personal why. And if someone comes on board and it takes them 6 months to do that in a way that resonates with themselves and the people with whom they work, that's perfectly fine. Take all the time you need as long as you get it right and it makes sense. Then the what I already described a little bit. It's process stewardships, process ownerships, and decision rights. That take time to negotiate very explicitly and clearly. And then we also identify what we call stepping stones, which most companies call KPIs or measures or metrics or OKRs. Are how do you measure what you're doing? How do you do a good job? And so people identify those and report on those for their peers and for themselves. If you don't have a boss, you need to be able to tell yourself how you're doing. And we call them stepping stones because we consider them stepping stones toward perfection. Because we benchmark perfection. We don't necessarily benchmark other companies or industries or sectors. We benchmark perfection because we think that unleashes blue sky innovation thinking. So perfection for a cost metric is 0. Perfection for an efficiency metric is 100%. Perfection for a quality metric is 0 defect. And so we have the why, the what, how you measure it, who you're connected to, and then people sign these agreements, either electronically or on paper, and they're considered enforceable peer agreements. And so, what is accountability? Well, most people misunderstand accountability, and this misunderstanding is global. It's all over the world, and many people think of accountability as punishment of some kind, or calling someone out, or whatever that looks like. But accountability is really about integrity and commitment and trust. So we ask people to make commitments to each other. We ask them to reduce these commitments to writing, and memorialize them in the colleague letter of understanding. And so accountability means that if someone makes a commitment to his or her fellow colleagues and fails to deliver on the commitment, the conversation is, you promised that you would perform this function and you didn't do it, and you didn't talk to us about renegotiating your commitment. So, what are you saying to us about our ability to trust you in the future? And that is the essence of a real and true accountability conversation. And, we're not perfect at it, and I doubt any company is, but we're trying to get to that point where everything is about commitment, trust, respect, and communication, and true accountability.
Doug, when you first, I want to go back a little bit. When you first were introduced to this idea, the idea of having no managers, having no supervisors, what was your personal reaction?
Thanks. That's a great question. And let me clarify one point that I may have not explained very well, and that is that in a self-managed ecosystem, it's not that there are no managers; it's that every single person is a manager. So management is how work gets done. Management is simply planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, and coordinating. And so everyone does that in his or her own personal life, and we're just recognizing that reality and bringing it into the workplace. So everyone's a manager, and so we talked about the two principles, and we were walked out of the trailer as a self-managed enterprise. What was my reaction to that? I was not surprised, because I'd been working with the founder for several years prior to that, and I knew how he thought about things and his thought processes. And, he's an idealistic guy, and he has certain beliefs about certain principles, and actually the principles are quite foundational. I mean, they're I would say the most important principles of human interaction. They're like to human beings what gravity is to physics. If you imagine a world, taking the first principle, imagine a world where everyone aligned with not using force. We wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And we know that's not reality. We understand that's not realistic, but that's not really the point. The point is, the closer we can get to that sort of ideal state, the better off we are as human beings, and the more space we open up for happiness and teamwork and prosperity.
But it is, or it can be, a reality in a workplace. So I think building on that the way you guys did was very strategic, very wise. Certainly in the world outside of our workspace or our family, yes, that's much more challenging. Never going to happen. It's kind of like saying that we're going to end poverty in the world. It's never going to happen. But
right.
In the workplace, I can see how it would work. So sorry, I meant to interrupt, but didn't mean to interrupt. So please continue.
Okay. Well, no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, and if you took the second principle, if everyone kept the commitments they make, if everyone did what they said they were going to do, imagine what kind of world that would be. That would be amazing. And the same logic applies to that principle. But when we walked out of the trailer, it really did not change our lives very much at all. We were already working 100-hour weeks trying to bring this project to fruition. And so we were already operating as self-managers, working together collaboratively. There's no hierarchy per se. And so, we kind of shrugged our shoulder. Okay, we're self-managed. Now let's get back to work, and another 100-hour week looms. And so it wasn't until other people started expressing interest in, really, that's how you guys operate? Really? How can that possibly? Well, that doesn't seem to make sense. When we started experiencing, sort of interest from the outside world, it actually kind of caused us to say, oh, well, I guess maybe what we're doing is a little bit unusual.
I want to return to the accountability piece. So let's say I'm on this 7 to 15 person team and somebody's not carrying their weight, whatever the example is. So how is that addressed? And what happens?
Yeah. So we have what we call free will. We all exercise it. We all have it. We all live in it. And so if someone detects that a fellow colleague is not carrying his or her weight, then that person has an affirmative obligation to directly address the problem with that colleague. And so that address can take multiple forms. It must be in the form of a request for change, because no one has any command authority. No one can walk up to another person and tell them to stop doing X and start doing Y, or to work harder, or to leave the company. No one has that authority, not even the founder, not even the owner. So everything is accomplished through request and response. And so if I detect, for example, that someone's not carrying their weight, I walk up to them and I ask them to change. And my request can take any form. It may be, I think you need some more training and education, or I think you need to change roles here in the enterprise, or it could be, I think you need to leave the company. So one has to frame a request that's appropriate to the circumstances. And then the person of whom the request is made has an obligation to respond. It's not okay to ignore the request. The person must respond. And so they're going to say whatever they're going to say. And so basically one of three responses is possible. Either the person agrees with the request, or the two parties negotiate some third option that they hadn't thought of before, or the person rejects and the request, disagrees. And so if I ask the person to leave the company and the person disagrees, then we can escalate to a second step, which is to bring in a third party mediator, which can be any other person in the enterprise, preferably someone who has some subject matter expertise around the issue at hand and who understands the process. And their role is just to listen to both parties and offer their best advice. And at the end of that process, we still have the same three possible outcomes. A person agrees, we negotiate something, or they disagree. If they disagree and I still believe in my original request, then we can escalate to a third step, which is to bring in a panel of mediators whose job is the same as the original third-party mediator, to just listen to both parties and offer their best advice. At the end of that process, we still have the same three possible outcomes. So if the person still disagrees and I still believe in my request, then we both have agreed in advance by virtue of subscribing to these principles that we will submit our difference in writing for binding arbitration, at which point it's over. That's how it works. So this process, we call it gaining agreement. It can conceivably be used to resolve any difference between anyone in the enterprise, from something trivial to something rather important, like one's continued employment.
Doug, you lost me there at the end. So it goes from a one-on-one discussion to involving a third party to involving a panel. And if they still disagree at the end, did I hear you correctly that there's, you said binding arbitration?
Yes.
And can you elaborate on that? Just
Yeah.
a little bit for my, I'm not entirely, I didn't grasp entirely what you meant by that.
Yeah. So at the end, we get the fourth step, and I still believe in my request, and the person still disagrees. Then we agree to document our difference in writing and submit it to the currently to the president of the enterprise, the legal president of the enterprise, who can make a decision or to delegate it to someone else who can make a decision, and a decision will be rendered. Now, the decision maker, the arbitrator, may do some additional investigation. That person has complete freedom to talk to the mediators and the parties and whoever else is needed, but that person will decide, and that decision is final. And everyone subscribes to this process by virtue of working at Morningstar.
Sounds very democratic.
Well, it's it's interesting that the process structurally has been around for thousands of years, so it's not a new process by any stretch of the imagination. It's a rather time-tested, proven process, and when we think about people who have an equal voice in an ecosystem, at least with respect to matters that affect them, we're not sure how else to do it. We have to have a process, and we consider it exhaustive due process. So this system is not democracy. It's not majoritarianism. It's not majority rule. It is respecting the voice and protecting the voice of each and every individual in the environment to the degree possible.
And yet, and at the end, there's still there. It sounds like the responsibility for the ultimate, the final responsibility for making a decision still rests with someone, or still must rest with someone in order to have that finality in disagreement.
Correct.
It sounds like the structure of the organization is delegation, the active delegation taken to the maximum.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. We pushed it, I think, to the maximum, to the ultimate degree possible in a commercial enterprise, but it stood the test of time for 30 years.
So Doug, I know we're going to post this at the end of the podcast, but I'd like you to take a moment and talk about your book. And you've also done a TED Talk. Both Jeff and I watched that beforehand. It was really great introduction. Those TED Talks, 15 minutes, whatever they are. The book, I was going to buy it, and I already had like 4 books stacked up I had to read. I said, I got to get through this, but I'm definitely going to buy it because what you're proposing is totally radical, totally unique. And very consistent with our beliefs. So could you take a moment and just talk about your book? I don't know whether you have it to show for those people who are watching, but there we go.
The book.
There it is. The No Limits Enterprise.
The No Limits Enterprise.
All right. And why did you choose that as a title?
So actually, Forbes Books proposed it. And as soon as they mentioned it, it just resonated with me. And I said, that's got to be the title, because that's really ultimately what I'm talking about to audiences all over the world. If you embrace clear, simple, foundational principles, then you have the opportunity to wrap whatever performance tools and systems and approaches you want around those principles, and there are really no conceivable limits to growth or development or leadership or innovation at all. And What I love about simple principles is that they create great freedom. Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, who I quote in the book, famously said that complex rules cause simple, stupid behavior, and simple rules allow for complex, intelligent behavior. And why would we not want to embrace complex, intelligent behavior, especially in a world that's changing as fast as things are changing today?
So, so talk to me about the work that you do today with companies. So are you no longer with Morningstar, right?
That's correct.
That
That's
was my
correct.
understanding. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what do you do now?
Yeah. So I work with companies all across the USA and all around the world, and the interest in simplicity and managing complexity with simplicity is global, and it is accelerating. In my view, I think I've been in some 40 countries in the last 5 years, delivering master classes, consulting, working with leadership teams, and doing training and education all across the world. And it's just been a fascinating experience. IBM did a study capitalizing on complexity a few years ago, and they found that most leaders doubt their own ability to handle complexity, and that's a problem because that means that people are losing sleep, their health is being affected. There's fear, anxiety, deep concern about our ability just to handle the world that's coming at us. And the world's changing so fast. If you look at the tech world, blockchain, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, robotics, nanotechnology, genetic engineering. Now we've got 4D printing. So we moved all the way past 3D printing. Now we're into 4D printing. And who's got the capacity to handle all this, along with the generational changes and the social changes that are ripping through society? So we got to figure out how to get back to simple, clear principles, and that's what I wanted to make very clear in this book.
I don't even know what 4D is, but let's not go there because that'd be a rabbit trail. But so I'm really curious. I want to go back to something so I can see how your program works with proactive people. I mean, you guys were working 100 hours and okay, we got this new thing. Okay, well, I guess it's the same. Let's go out and work another 100 hours. That's great. Where does it, what do you do with, it's like, okay, I want to move to this. I really like what Doug's talking about, but I've got some people on my team that aren't very proactive. So what do you do? Is that just not going to work with them, or do you find that engages them? What have you found?
Yeah, so I really come down on the belief that it works for everyone to a degree. It works for proactive, high initiative people best. They will take fuller advantage of this opportunity. But it does work for everyone to some degree. Because when you think about it, everyone is already a self-manager, at least in his or her own personal life. Everyone makes gigantic, life-altering decisions on their own without a boss. And we decide who to date, who to marry, where to go to college, what to do for a living, whether to buy a house or car, have kids. We all make these decisions without a boss. So why is it if we enter the workplace and we know what to do and how to do it, why do we need a boss? That's the jugular question here. And so some people certainly will be passive and may not take full advantage of the opportunity presented by a self-managed ecosystem. But that's kind of, I guess the vigorish that we pay for enjoying the vast benefits of organizational self-management. So it's going to work for everyone to some degree, but some more than others. And we believe in free will. So this whole concept is surrounded by 19th century German philosophy, like Immanuel Kant. We believe in free will, and if you believe in free will, if you really understand the philosophy that we're talking about here, then it's nobody's job to motivate anyone else. And people are responsible for themselves. They're responsible for their own training, for their own development, for their own growth, for their own career progression. They're fully responsible. And in a truly self-managed enterprise, there is literally no place to hide. So if someone signs an agreement and agrees to be responsible for a particular thing, and maybe that thing doesn't require a lot of initiative, maybe it's just performing the same task over and over again. But if that person signs an agreement and agrees to be fully accountable for that thing, if something goes wrong with that process, there is no one else to talk to but that person. And that's where those accountability conversations we talked about earlier come into play.
So I'm also curious, in your TED Talk, if I'm remembering correctly, you talked about something that every colleague has, like a game. They're going to come in and play a game every day. So they have their metrics clearly laid out. And so they're kind of checking off the list that, and it's kind of a feel good, I did this, I did that. But talk to me about, I don't like the term gamification, but this thing where you've got different generations like you brought up, and the metrics are agreed to, the responsibilities are agreed to, and then people kind of take ownership and they're working through their list. And your perspective is that they love coming to work because they know they're achieving something each day. Can you talk a little bit about how that's structured and how that communicates within a team, that whole type of thing?
Right. So to the degree possible, the stepping stones, what we talked about earlier, KPIs, measures, metrics, stepping stones, we try to express those online as much as possible on our intranet at Morningstar. And try to express those as two-dimensional line graphs where the x-axis is time, and try to show trends. And so the question, and then we publish those transparently across the enterprise. So what we try to do is trigger conversations by and between colleagues to help each other, a process we call peer regulation. So if I notice my fellow colleague has a stepping stone trend line and it's bending downward away from perfection, then my conversation with that person should be, what can I do to help you? I should be expressing some sort of generosity or contribution spirit and trying to help that person bend the trend in the right direction. And if the trend is already bending in the right direction or flat, then what can I do to help you bend the curve even steeper? So we think this is more powerful than relying on a boss with a span of control of maybe 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 40, whatever it is, noticing something and having some kind of traditional management accountability conversation, which nobody enjoys. So we believe in the kind of this constant, real-time, continuous peer regulation concept based on these transparently published enterprise-wide stepping stones, where people are measuring, how they're doing in real time.
So it's interesting. I've got to be careful here because I could go on in this conversation for a long time, and I know that you've got a limited amount of time. But when I looked at your book, I want to buy your book. I don't know about you, but I love Amazon reviews. Although on certain products you can't trust them, but on books you usually can. And you had tons of positive reviews on your book. But you had one guy who looked like he had slipped through the system there and was an ex-employee at Morningstar, and he was an unhappy camper. And I don't know whether you've seen it or not, but I was just like, this guy didn't apparently drink the Kool-Aid. I don't like that analogy because we live near San Francisco and Jim Jones and the whole thing. But the whole concept of he didn't buy in, but he stayed, And it's kind of curious with your structure, how would someone like that actually be able to stay? Because he was kind of down on parts of it, whereas other people, whether they were part of the company and reviewing it or not part of the company, were really endorsing this entire system.
Yeah, well, I should point out, I think the review to which you're referring is for the first book, which is Beyond Empowerment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I did see that review, and I'm thankful and grateful to that individual because it was a raw, honest, unfiltered review. He thought the idea, the whole concept was pretty much garbage, and so I appreciate that. And in any system, there's going to be some kind of a bell curve of people who are champions and people who just think it's okay, and then some people are going to hate it. And I have no idea who the individual is. I hope he or she finds happiness in life. Apparently, they weren't happy in this ecosystem, and that's okay. But people are free; they have free will. So if it's truly a system that doesn't resonate with them, they should go find something else that makes more sense, and then the whole world will be happier.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I have one last question for you, and then we need to wrap up because we're almost out of time here, and I know you got something else planned. In this ecosystem where there's kind of a band of equals. Well, actually, I have two questions, but I'll just end with this one. There is. How do you do the compensation piece? Is any of the compensation based on performance incentives, kind of like Nucor Steel does, type of thing?
No, it's not based on that. There's a discretionary bonus, but basically there's no formula for incentive compensation. People are paid pretty well. People work pretty hard. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation for 3.5 months, and there's a lot that goes into getting the factories ready to run and operating them at a high level with uptime. So, yeah, people are paid for the most part. People that work year round are salaried colleagues, professional colleagues. And at the end of the year, there's a representative compensation committee at each factory location. And everyone associated with that particular location meets with the committee, shares their individual colleague letter of understanding, their pertinent stepping stones information. And if a person wants an increase in pay above and beyond the cost of living increase for that year, then that person is expected to make a bona fide business case for the increase based on some pertinent training or expertise that one developed that applies to the company, or that maybe there's some capital project that had a particularly successful payback of some kind. So a bona fide business case, and then the person enters into negotiation with the committee to come out with a result that everyone's happy with. So that's really how it works.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go back on what I said. I'm going to ask my last question. So I'm just struck by, you have this group, this team of equals. It sounds so cool. And it sounds like, but you've got a lot of people joining the group that come with various backgrounds, various skill sets. And so does the organization really commit to teaching soft skills? And then also this hiring piece, because you mentioned like the group of electricians are going to hire this other, person for their team. Do you teach them a hiring? We're all about a hiring system and soft skills and stuff. Does Morningstar invest really heavily in training their people in developing soft skills and the systems that they implement, particularly the hiring piece to get the right people on the bus, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've done lots of training in that. At one point we had what we called a mini MBA, which was like 100 hours of coursework over a 12-month period. And it applied to strategy, both for one's self and for business, business process management in depth and in detail, soft skills and other skills like negotiation, mediation, teamwork, and leadership, and then financial literacy, both cost accounting and financial accounting and return on investment calculations. So soft skills are really important in the last couple of years. Have seen classes developed in emotional intelligence and social intelligence. And those skills are going to be really crucial going forward into the 21st century. So yeah, we do have an investment of those, and we cannot ignore them.
Awesome. So how do people get a hold of you, Doug?
So best way is email, and that's d.kirkpatrick@newfocusgroup.com, nufocusgroup.com. Or they can go to our website, which is newfocusgroupusa.com, or they can hit me at Redshifter3 on Twitter.
Okay, where's the Redshifter come from?
So I had my own consultancy for a while in the early 2000s, and it was called Redshift, and so that became my Twitter handle.
Okay, did I leave anything out, Jeff?
The book.
The book, yeah. Again, the book. Show us the book one more time.
The No Limits Enterprise.
Okay, I love it.
Awesome.
Okay,
awesome.
I got to order as soon as we get off. That's it. I still got 2 more books to get through, but I got to get it on the stack. So thank you so much, Doug. Really appreciate you being with us. This has been fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time.